If you've ever stood at the edge of your own family's happiness, watching laughter spill out like warm sunlight while you lingered in the shadow, you'll understand where my story begins. My name is Hannah Miller, and for most of my life, I was the quiet daughter, the one who set the table, who picked up the pieces, who cheered from the sidelines as others took center stage. Some families have an unspoken script: who shines, who supports, who stays silent. Ours was no different. My older sister Natalie was always the main character in my parents' eyes. For a long time, I convinced myself I was content with my role until the day I realized I'd been living my life on mute. You might think family stories always follow a gentle arc, some bumps, some laughs, then a hug at the end. But real life is rarely so simple. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us most can cause the deepest hurts. Sometimes loyalty feels like a chain, not a gift. And sometimes the courage to choose yourself is the hardest act of all. Today, I want to invite you on a journey not just through the big dramatic moments, but through all the quiet sacrifices and the nearly invisible boundaries that shape who we become. I'll share not just what happened, but how it felt, the doubts, the guilt, the tiny rebellions, and finally the freedom that comes from stepping into your own light. Maybe as you listen, you'll recognize parts of your own story here, or maybe you'll simply find the reassurance that you're not alone, even if your family has made you feel that way. Before we go any further, let me ask, have you ever wondered who you might become if you stopped apologizing for your own happiness? Have you ever wanted to rewrite the story that others keep telling about you? If so, I hope you'll stay with me. This isn't just a story about family drama or old wounds. It's about the quiet, powerful decision to choose yourself, even when it feels impossible. Let's begin, because sometimes the most important stories are the ones we finally dare to tell for ourselves. I used to believe that every family has a certain music to it, a rhythm, a set of harmonies, the way voices blend or clash around the dinner table. In the Miller house, Natalie's voice always seemed to ring out first. My parents would talk about her with a soft pride. Natalie has such big dreams. Natalie needs a little extra help. We're just so proud of her. I was there, of course, setting out silverware or quietly clearing plates, but it often felt like I was listening to a concert from the hallway rather than standing in the spotlight. People sometimes think it's easy being the younger sister, the second draft, as my dad would joke. But it comes with its own invisible weight, the pressure to keep things peaceful, to never ask for too much, to be grateful for what you get. I remember the first time I noticed the difference. I was 10, and our school held its annual science fair. I had spent weeks carefully building a model of the solar system, painting each planet with toothpicks and patience. Natalie, on the other hand, forgot about the deadline until the night before. She threw together a volcano made from a baking soda box and colored paper. On the morning of the fair, my parents fussed over her, making sure her volcano looked presentable. They told me I was so reliable, but the excitement in their voices was all for Natalie's wild last-minute energy. That day, her project erupted across the table and made a mess. Mine sat quietly, all the planets in perfect orbit, a silent tribute to order. Natalie didn't win a ribbon, but at dinner that night, she was the hero, the story everyone wanted to retell. I learned even then that sometimes you can do everything right and still feel invisible. Over time, those small moments add up. In high school, I was the one who remembered everyone's birthday, the one who stayed up late helping Natalie with her English essays or practicing her lines for the school play. My mom would sigh and say, "Thank goodness you're so dependable, Hannah. Natalie's lucky to have you." Sometimes I'd wonder what it would be like to be the one who needed help, who was allowed to stumble. But I told myself that every family has a helper, and maybe this was just my place in the story. If you've ever been cast in a supporting role while someone else plays the star, you know how easy it is to start believing that your needs don't matter quite as much. It wasn't just our home where this dynamic played out. Friends and neighbors saw it too. At birthday parties, adults would pull me aside and whisper, "You're such a good sister," as if I'd done something heroic just by staying quiet. At church, the pastor's wife asked if I could help watch the toddlers during Sunday school because you're so responsible. People began to expect my helpfulness, my ability to disappear. It became a kind of superpower, one I didn't choose, but couldn't seem to shake. I carried it into every corner of my life, always saying yes, always smoothing over arguments, always making sure everyone else had what they needed, even if it meant setting myself aside. As I grew older, I started to notice how this role shaped the way I saw myself. I was the peacemaker, the fixer, the person who made sure the train ran on time, while others got to enjoy the scenery. I envied Natalie's freedom to be messy, to take up space, to demand second chances. I watched her stumble through relationships, quit jobs, chase big dreams that sometimes crashed and burned. My parents always caught her when she fell. I was proud of my reliability, but sometimes I wondered if anyone would catch me if I ever let go. I don't think my parents ever meant to make me feel less important. They grew up in a generation where children had roles: the responsible one, the dreamer, the rebel, the caretaker. Maybe they thought I needed less because I could handle more. Maybe they felt Natalie's mistakes more sharply and wanted to shield her from disappointment. Or maybe, like so many parents, they were just doing the best they could with the tools they had. But whatever the reason, the pattern was set. If Natalie's world wobbled, I was expected to steady it. If she forgot her lunch, I shared mine. If she needed an alibi, I became her cover story. Looking back now, I see how common this pattern is. I've heard from so many people, friends, viewers, even strangers online who grew up playing supporting roles in their own families. One friend told me I was the good kid because my brother always got into trouble. My parents leaned on me so hard I forgot how to ask for help. Another said I was the oldest, but my little sister was the golden child. I was just there to make sure the house didn't burn down. These stories aren't rare. They are woven into the fabric of so many families, regardless of culture or background. There's a quiet pain in being the one everyone counts on, but rarely celebrates. Over the years, it can chip away at your confidence, your sense of worth. You learn to measure your value by what you do for others, not by who you are. And the truth is, it can take a lifetime to unlearn that lesson. But here's what I wish someone had told me back when I was still setting the table for Natalie's spotlight. You don't have to earn your place by making yourself small. Your kindness, your strength, your reliability, they matter just as much as someone else's dreams or drama. You deserve to be seen for who you are, not just for what you provide. The real gift is learning to honor your own story, even if no one else is paying attention. That lesson wouldn't come easily for me. For a long time, I stayed in my familiar role, telling myself that harmony was more important than honesty, that support was more valuable than self-expression. But everything changed. The year I met Ethan Walker, suddenly my quiet world was upended not just by love, but by the realization that my life could belong to me if only I dared to step out of the shadows. And so I want to invite you into the next chapter, the season when I first dared to imagine a future where I was more than just a supporting act. It's the story of a dinner table, a hopeful heart, and the kind of courage that grows slowly, one small decision at a time. The first time I brought Ethan Walker home, the air in our house buzzed with a kind of hopefulness I'd rarely felt. My mother fussed over the tablecloth, smoothing invisible wrinkles. My father put on the old jazz records he reserved for special guests. Natalie was away for work, and for once, I didn't feel like I was bracing for a performance. It was just me and Ethan, no spotlight, no competition, just the two of us stepping into a new chapter together. Ethan was steady in a way that soothed the anxious, responsible part of me. He listened, he noticed he made space for my voice in ways that felt quietly revolutionary. That night, as we ate my mother's roast chicken and passed stories around the table, I caught a glimpse of a life where I could be seen for who I was not, just for what I could do for everyone else. For so many women, introducing a partner to the family is both a milestone and a test. I'd heard stories from friends who felt invisible next to older siblings or whose families judged their choices through the narrow lens of tradition. My friend Mia, for example, told me how her parents treated her boyfriend like a passing phase, barely listening to his words, their eyes drifting always to her brother, the golden son. I felt lucky at first that my parents welcomed Ethan warmly. They asked about his work in software engineering, his childhood in Seattle, his favorite football team. I watched my father's eyes soften as Ethan described his small-town roots and his plans for the future. For a moment, it felt like I had finally brought home a piece of happiness that belonged entirely to me. But happiness in a family like mine always had an expiration date, especially when it brushed up against long-standing habits. After dinner, my mother pulled me aside in the kitchen, her voice low and almost conspiratorial. "He's very stable, Hannah. I think he'll take good care of you. Just remember, don't let things move too quickly, and always make sure Natalie feels included." Okay, there it was, the reminder that even my most personal choices were tangled up in someone else's feelings. I smiled and nodded. But inside, I felt the old tug of war between loyalty and longing. It's a feeling many people know well, the sense that every step forward is somehow a step away from the people who raised you. Ethan, for his part, seemed to notice the delicate dance of my family right away. After we left, he squeezed my hand and said, "Your folks seem great, but why do I get the sense you're always holding your breath around them?" I hesitated, not sure how to explain the years of subtle accommodations, the ways I learned to step aside to keep the peace. "It's just how it's always been," I finally admitted. "I'm used to making sure everyone else is comfortable." He looked at me for a long moment and then said quietly, "I hope you know you don't have to do that with me." His words planted a seed of possibility. What if I could build a life where I didn't have to shrink myself to fit someone else's comfort? That night, I lay awake replaying every moment, every look, every word. I thought about how easy it would be to slip back into my usual role, helpful, accommodating, always ready to smooth over rough edges. But for the first time, I wondered what it would feel like to let anyone really see me with all my dreams and doubts and edges. So many women I know have carried this question into adulthood. Is it selfish to want a love that feels entirely your own? Is it wrong to choose yourself, even if it means disappointing the people you love? As I watched Ethan fold into my family's rhythms, listening to my father's stories, complimenting my mother's cooking, even laughing at Natalie's old high school photos on the fridge, I felt hope and worry in equal measure. Could I really claim happiness without feeling guilty? Could I let myself be loved without always second-guessing my right to that joy? I think these questions haunt a lot of support act daughters, those of us raised to believe our worth comes from making life easier for everyone else. A week after Ethan's visit, my mother called to say Natalie would be home the following weekend. There was excitement in her voice, but also a kind of nervous energy I recognized all too well. "We'll have another dinner this time with everyone," she said. The words "everyone" lingered. I felt my old anxiety returning. What would it be like bringing Ethan into the full orbit of our family with Natalie there, with all the old scripts ready to play out? I wanted so badly for things to be different, for my joy to be enough, for my happiness to stand on its own without negotiation. Real life rarely gives us easy answers. Families are complicated, and love doesn't always fit neatly into the roles we grew up playing. Sometimes what matters most is having the courage to try anyway, to introduce your happiness to the world and see what happens, even if you're scared. That's what I did with Ethan, and looking back, I'm grateful. I didn't let fear make the decision for me. If there's a lesson in that season of my life, it's this: the people who truly love you will want to know your real self, not just the version of you that makes everything easier. It's okay to want a love that feels safe, a life that feels like yours. It's okay to choose happiness even if it feels unfamiliar. As the day approached for Natalie's return, I felt a new kind of tension, building a sense that this next chapter would test not just my relationship with Ethan, but my relationship with myself. I could feel the old roles waiting to be resumed, the familiar patterns ready to reassert themselves. But this time, I promised myself I would hold on to the possibility of something more. What I didn't know was just how quickly everything could change. Because the night Natalie walked back through our front door, the old harmony of our family began to shift, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. Natalie came home on a Friday evening with the brisk, purposeful energy of someone used to making an entrance. She swept into the kitchen, trailing the scent of airport coffee, her laughter echoing through the house as if she'd never really left. My mother immediately sprang into action, heating up leftovers and asking about her trip, her questions tumbling over each other. Natalie told stories of difficult clients and long layovers, painting her life in broad, vivid strokes. Ethan and I arrived a few minutes later, arms full of groceries for the weekend. I could feel the electricity in the air as I introduced him to my sister for the very first time. There's a kind of intuition sisters have, an almost silent language of glances, pauses the shape of a smile. That night, as I watched Natalie and Ethan shake hands, I sensed something subtle shifting. Natalie's gaze lingered a little too long. She leaned in, laughing a bit louder than usual at Ethan's gentle jokes. When we sat down to eat, she found reasons to ask him questions, to draw out his stories. Her voice threaded with an almost eager warmth. To anyone else, it might have seemed perfectly friendly, but to me, it felt like a faint but persistent warning bell. It's easy to dismiss those early flashes of jealousy as paranoia, especially when you've spent your life doubting your own needs. I told myself I was overreacting. Natalie had always been outgoing, always quick to make friends. Maybe she was just glad to have someone new at the table, someone who brought fresh energy into our little family routine. Still, that night when Ethan and I left, I found myself turning the evening over in my mind, replaying her laughter, the way she'd touched his arm in conversation. I wanted to trust my instincts, but years of being the reasonable one made it hard to believe my own eyes. Real jealousy is rarely loud. Sometimes it's a collection of tiny moments, a look, a gesture, a choice of words that build up over time. I remember a college friend, Melissa, who confided that her younger sister always seemed to borrow her boyfriend's attention. It's like she needs to prove she's more interesting even when we're not competing, Melissa once told me. You feel crazy for noticing, but you can't ignore it either. In families everywhere, these small rivalries bubble just below the surface, rarely acknowledged, often misunderstood. The next morning, I found Natalie and Ethan deep in conversation over breakfast. Natalie perched on the counter, Ethan leaning against the fridge, both laughing softly at some private joke. My mother caught my eye, her expression neutral, as if to say, "Isn't it nice to see everyone getting along?" I smiled, but inside unease curled like smoke. When Ethan left to help my dad in the garage, Natalie turned to me and said, "You know, he's not what I expected. He's impressive." There was an edge to her voice, admiration mingled with something more complicated. "I can see why you like him." I nodded, unsure what to say, unsure if I was reading too much into things. That weekend, Natalie seemed to find reasons to be near Ethan at every turn. She offered to help him wash the car, joined him for a walk around the neighborhood, even asked for his advice about her job. To his credit, Ethan remained kind but reserved, always polite, never flirtatious. Still, the dynamic in our house had shifted. Family dinners became a stage for Natalie's stories and questions, her laughter growing louder, her glances more pointed. My parents, caught up in their usual routines, didn't seem to notice. Or maybe after years of smoothing over the rough edges, they simply chose not to see. The truth is, families don't always talk about jealousy, not the kind that grows quietly between sisters or that simmers beneath shared spaces and unspoken expectations. In American culture, we're told that siblings should be best friends, should support each other, no matter what. But the reality is messier. Sibling rivalry can be subtle, insidious, hard to name. Sometimes it's a competition for attention. Other times it's a battle for validation, a fight to prove who deserves happiness first. Looking back, I realize I made a mistake common to many peacemakers. I chose to ignore my discomfort. I told myself Natalie would move on, that her sudden interest in Ethan was just another phase, that my job was to be gracious and patient. But ignoring jealousy doesn't make it disappear, it simply allows it to fester. I've since heard from others who face similar situations, like my neighbor Carrie, who spent years excusing her sister's boundary-pushing behavior, only to realize too late the toll it took on her own marriage and self-esteem. If there's a lesson in this chapter, it's that jealousy, like any difficult feeling, deserves to be noticed, named, and understood. Pretending not to notice it only gives it more power. It's not wrong to acknowledge when something feels off or to draw gentle boundaries around what matters most. In fact, it's essential even if it feels awkward at first. As the weekend came to a close, I found myself more watchful than ever, counting the ways Natalie reached for Ethan's attention, measuring my own responses, wondering if I should speak up. I wanted to protect my new happiness, but I didn't want to cause a scene or hurt Natalie or upset the fragile balance of our family. So I said nothing, tucked my worries away, and hoped for the best. But as we drove home that Sunday evening, Ethan noticed my silence. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice full of concern. I hesitated, then offered him a half-truth. "Just tired, that's all." What I didn't say, but what I was slowly learning, is that families, like old houses, creak in the places they've always been weakest. My family's weak spot was our unwillingness to talk honestly about uncomfortable truths. For years, I'd believed that keeping the peace was the same as keeping us close. But sometimes peace built on silence isn't peace at all. It's just another kind of loneliness. Little did I know the real storm was only beginning to gather. Natalie's interest in Ethan wasn't just a passing curiosity. It would soon test every boundary I'd struggled to hold and force me to choose between the role I'd always played and the person I wanted to become. If you grow up in a family where favoritism is an unspoken language, you learn to read the signs before you even know the word. For as long as I can remember, my parents operated on a silent code: Natalie needed more, so Natalie got more. It wasn't always obvious, no golden child banners or explicit praise, but it was everywhere, woven into the fabric of our lives. When Natalie forgot her homework, there was always a gentle excuse or a phone call to the teacher. If she was late for curfew, my mother would sigh, "She just loses track of time," while the same slip on my part earned a stern look and a lecture. It became clear that the rules bent for Natalie often at my expense, and while I didn't resent her for it, not at first, the unfairness left a lingering ache I couldn't name. These small injustices pile up quietly like snow on a roof. On their own, they seem harmless, a little extra help, a bit of leeway, a second chance. But over time, they shape the way you see yourself and your place in the world. I remember one winter when Natalie and I both signed up for swim lessons. She skipped half the classes, always with a plausible reason: her ankle hurt, she had too much homework, she didn't feel well. Our parents never forced the issue. Meanwhile, I dutifully showed up every week, learning to swim laps, while Natalie hung back wrapped in a towel, chatting with the lifeguard. At the end of the season, we both got participation ribbons, and my parents beamed equally at our accomplishments. Even then, something inside me wondered if all my effort even mattered. I know now that our family dynamic wasn't unique. I've heard stories from friends and strangers alike, stories of older siblings given more freedom or younger ones coddled, while the others picked up the slack. There's the classic firstborn privilege in many American families, where the eldest is both the experiment and the expectation, or the youngest, who is forever the baby, no matter how old they get. My neighbor Carol once confided, "My brother could do no wrong. He crashed the car and my parents blamed the road conditions. I missed curfew once and they grounded me for a month." These stories echo in countless homes, shaping self-worth and family relationships for years. Favoritism, even when gentle or unintentional, carries consequences. For Natalie, it meant growing up shielded from certain realities, rarely having to face the discomfort of falling short or making amends. For me, it meant learning that my needs were less urgent, my mistakes less forgivable, my wins less celebrated. I became the helper, the one expected to understand, to be flexible, to never make a fuss. My parents praised me for my maturity, not realizing how lonely it felt to be the one who doesn't need anything. It's a pattern that can follow you into adulthood, shaping how you set boundaries, how you speak up or don't for yourself. Psychologists call this dynamic parentification, when a child becomes the caretaker or peacemaker, often at the expense of their own needs. In our family, my role was never official, but it was always expected. If Natalie needed something, I gave it up. If Natalie wanted attention, I stepped back. My parents never asked for this explicitly, but they never stopped it either. Over time, I began to shrink myself to fit the empty spaces Natalie left behind. Looking back, I see the subtle harm in never being allowed to say no. It taught me that my comfort, my ambitions, and even my happiness could wait, that it was selfish to want more than my share. Even now, as an adult, I catch myself hesitating to speak up in meetings or automatically volunteering to take on extra work, as if I still need to prove my value by being useful. But favoritism doesn't only hurt the overlooked child, it also does a disservice to the favored one. Natalie grew up believing that someone would always catch her, that she could make mistakes without facing the consequences. It made it harder for her to develop resilience, to handle disappointment, or to trust her own abilities. She stumbled through college and jobs, often turning to my parents for help when things fell apart. They responded with sympathy and rescue missions, but I could see the exhaustion growing in their eyes. The very protection that kept Natalie safe also kept her from growing strong. There are moments I wish we had talked about all of this, really talked honestly and openly without blame or defensiveness. Maybe things could have been different if my parents had admitted their fears for Natalie, or if I had found the words to express my own hurt. But silence became our family's comfort zone, a space where no one risked discomfort, and so the patterns repeated. If there's a lesson here, it's that love without boundaries isn't kindness, it's avoidance. True love sometimes means saying no, letting someone struggle, letting them learn the lessons that only hardship can teach. I know families who found healing by facing these hard truths, with parents who apologized, siblings who forgave, and children who grew up knowing their worth didn't depend on being needed. As I entered adulthood, I promised myself I would not become bitter. But the roots of favoritism run deep, and their effects would show themselves in ways I couldn't yet imagine. I took my helper skills into every relationship, always ready to fix, to forgive, to step aside. It would take falling in love and nearly losing that love to finally recognize that being a good daughter didn't mean sacrificing my own happiness. The next chapter in my story would test those old boundaries in ways I never anticipated. Because as Natalie's struggles grew and her need for attention intensified, My parents' inability to say no would push our family toward a moment of crisis, one that would force all of us to finally confront the truth about what it really means to care for one another. Some lessons arrive slowly as gentle whispers rather than thunderclaps. For me, learning to draw boundaries was like tuning a radio, subtle, frustrating, sometimes full of static. I didn't wake up one morning and declare today, I'll finally stand up for myself. It was more like a series of small moments, each one nudging me closer to my own voice. The first time it happened was almost accidental. I was in my 20s, just starting a new job balancing late-night calls with Ethan and weekend family obligations. Natalie called in a panic about missing a flight and begged me to cover for her with our parents. Without thinking, I nearly agreed, then paused. For the first time, I heard my own exhaustion. "I'm sorry, Nat," I said softly. "I can't lie for you this time." The line went silent. I braced for anger, but all I heard was her quiet, surprised, "Oh." That tiny no felt heavier than I expected, but it also felt strangely empowering. Saying no is a skill that so many helpers struggle to learn. I've heard countless stories from women and men who spent their youth being the glue that held everyone together, only to realize too late that no one was doing the same for them. My friend Linda once confessed, "It took me years to realize I was allowed to have needs of my own. I used to think saying no would make me a bad sister or daughter, but now I know that boundaries aren't barriers. They're the bridges to real relationships." That perspective didn't come easily to her, and it certainly didn't come easily to me. Boundaries in families are often invisible until someone bumps up against them. The first time I told my parents I couldn't drive Natalie across town on a work night, they looked genuinely confused. "But you're always so helpful, Hannah," my mother said, her voice tinged with disappointment. The urge to backtrack was almost overwhelming. I hated seeing them upset, hated disappointing anyone. But deep down, I knew that if I always said yes, my own life would slowly disappear. I reassured my parents I still loved them, that I was there if it was an emergency, but that I had to protect my own time too. Old habits die hard, especially in families where certain roles are set in stone. At first, my small acts of resistance, declining a favor, voicing an opinion, taking time for myself, were met with confusion, sometimes even resentment. Natalie, used to my unwavering support, grew distant for a while. Our conversations turned formal, then sparse. I worried I'd broken something precious. But after a few weeks, she called not to ask for help, but simply to talk. "I guess I never realized how much I leaned on you," she admitted. "Maybe I needed to figure things out for myself." That moment of honesty became a turning point in our relationship. We began to talk more as equals, rather than hero and sidekick. Setting boundaries didn't mean becoming selfish or cold. It meant learning the value of mutual respect. If I kept giving away all my energy, there would be nothing left for myself or for anyone else. Ethan Ever, the gentle encourager, reminded me that love built on obligation isn't love at all. It's duty. "You deserve to be more than just the family's problem solver," he told me one night, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "You get to be the main character in your own life." Looking back, I realize how many of us grow up believing that harmony is more important than honesty. We become experts at smoothing things over, at swallowing our own disappointment to keep the peace. But peace built on silence is fragile. True harmony only comes when everyone's voice matters, when yes and no both have equal weight. One of the most practical lessons I learned was that boundaries require clarity, not confrontation. When Natalie asked for a favor that felt too much, I explained my limits calmly. "I'd love to help, but I can't this weekend. Maybe next time." Sometimes she was annoyed, sometimes she understood. Each time it got a little easier for both of us. My parents too started to adapt, though, not without a few bumps along the way. They began to see that my needs weren't threats. They were invitations to a more honest, grown-up relationship. In American culture, we often talk about independence as a virtue, but sometimes it's misunderstood. Setting boundaries isn't about shutting people out, it's about letting them in without losing yourself. I read once that the walls we build to protect ourselves can also keep out love. But the right kind of boundaries actually let love in. They create space for real connection, not just endless sacrifice. If you find yourself in a similar position, always saying yes, always smoothing the path for others, I hope you remember that it's okay to protect your energy. It's not selfish to want time for yourself to say no when you need to. The people who truly love you will learn to honor your boundaries, even if it takes time. And if they don't, maybe that's the lesson you were meant to learn all along. This new way of living wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't always neat. There were setbacks, moments of guilt, old patterns that threatened to pull me back. But with every small act of courage, I felt my life expand. I found more joy in my friendships, more confidence at work, and perhaps, most importantly, more peace within myself. But the greatest test of my newfound boundaries was yet to come. Because as I learned to say yes to my own life, Natalie's struggles began to intensify. The balance we'd worked so hard to achieve was about to be thrown into chaos. And my family, so accustomed to leaning on me, would soon ask me to make a choice I never could have imagined. The true test of boundaries isn't in the quiet moments, but when storms gather. For me, the clouds rolled in just as Ethan and I decided to set a date for our wedding. We were filled with hope, picking out venues, tasting cakes, building a future that finally felt like it belonged to both of us. I wanted our day to be small but meaningful, with laughter, music, and family gathered under one roof. But underneath my excitement ran an old current of anxiety. Would Natalie be happy for me? Would my parents support me without reservation in families where roles are fixed and loyalty is tangled? Celebration is rarely simple. It started with little things: Natalie's quick, sharp jokes about wedding mania, her sudden reluctance to talk about plans. She canceled lunch dates and missed appointments to look at dresses. My parents, sensing her discomfort, tried to reassure her at every turn. "There's plenty of time, sweetheart," my mother would say. "You'll have your day too." I felt the invisible strings pulling us all back into our old pattern: Natalie, at the center, the rest of us arranging ourselves around her. But this was my moment, and for the first time, I didn't want to step aside. Things came to a head one night when we all sat down for dinner at my parents' house. The conversation was brittle, every word a potential trigger. At some point, Natalie put down her fork and said, "I just can't believe my little sister is getting married before me." Her voice cracked with an anger I hadn't expected. My mother rushed in with reassurances, but Natalie only grew more upset, eventually announcing, "If you go to Hannah's wedding, don't expect me to ever speak to you again." My father, caught between his daughters, fell silent. I sat there stunned as my family fractured along the same old lines. It's easy to judge from the outside, to wonder why any parent would cave to such demands, but family loyalties run deep. My parents had always bent over backward to avoid Natalie's pain, believing that one day she would outgrow her jealousy, that their extra care would somehow heal her. But in that moment, their love became a trap, a way of avoiding conflict rather than addressing the real wounds underneath. I later learned that many families experience similar ultimatums, especially around milestone events. A friend once told me about her own engagement. My sister refused to come to my wedding unless I agreed to let her bring an ex-boyfriend. My parents tried to keep the peace, but all it did was keep us all on eggshells. What's at stake in moments like these isn't just a single celebration, but the right of each family member to have a life of their own. I wanted my parents to choose me just once, to show me that my happiness was worthy of their presence, even if it upset the fragile balance. But the old habit was too strong. A few days later, my mother called with trembling regret. "We're so proud of you, Hannah, but we can't leave Natalie alone. She's just not ready." I felt the words like a stone in my chest. I hung up the phone and let myself cry tears for all the birthdays, graduations, and quiet victories where I'd played the understudy in my own story. There is a unique kind of heartbreak that comes from being asked to make yourself smaller for the sake of someone else's comfort. It's a grief that's hard to explain because it's not about the loss of love, but the loss of equal love. I wanted to be strong, to rise above, to believe that their absence wouldn't matter. But deep down, I was shattered. Ethan held me that night, whispering that we would build a family of our own, that I would never have to apologize for my joy in his world. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is move forward anyway. I decided we would get married with or without my family's blessing. We called Ethan's parents, who responded with open arms and open hearts. They helped us plan, celebrated every little milestone, and promised to stand in for the family I was missing. It was a bittersweet comfort, both a loss and a gift. If you've ever had to choose between your happiness and someone else's expectations, you know how heavy that choice can feel. I thought about the stories I'd heard from others, people who skipped graduations, missed birthdays, or quietly altered their dreams so as not to disturb the peace at home. A woman from my book club once confided, "When I eloped, I felt guilty for years, but I also knew I would regret letting my family's drama steal that joy from me." There's no easy answer, but here's what I learned. You can mourn what you didn't get and still choose what you deserve. As our wedding day drew near, I felt a strange mix of grief and gratitude. I missed my parents, but I also felt free to celebrate, free to love, free to take up space in my own life. The absence of my family wasn't just a void, it was a lesson. I learned that my worth didn't depend on their approval, that my happiness was not a threat to anyone else's. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real beginning of my adult life. But the story doesn't end with a single act of courage. In families, old patterns have a way of circling back, testing our boundaries again and again. I didn't know it then, but my family's ultimatum was only the beginning. The choices we made in the name of peace would echo through the years, shaping every reunion, every memory, every dream that followed. Next, I'd discover what it meant to build a new family, not just through marriage, but through friendship, self-acceptance, and the slow, steady work of healing old wounds. And just as I started to find my place in the world, my family's story would take another unexpected turn, one that would challenge everything I thought I'd learned about love, loyalty, and letting go. The morning of my wedding dawned, with a golden hush, sunlight pooling on the hardwood floor of the small community hall we'd rented. There was a gentle ache behind my happiness, a bittersweet shadow that followed me as I slipped into my simple dress. Ethan's mother arrived early, bustling around with the nervous energy of someone determined to make everything perfect. She pressed my hand between hers and said, "Family is who stands by you." It was a kindness I didn't know I needed. Her words lingered as I glanced at my phone, hoping still foolishly for a message from my parents or Natalie. There was none. Instead of letting the emptiness swallow me, I looked around at the faces that were present, Ethan's family, my closest friends, even a couple of neighbors who'd watched me grow up. They weren't bound to me by blood, but by the choice to show up, to witness, to celebrate. It made me think of the concept of chosen family, something I'd read about and heard in support groups. Sometimes the people who love you best are the ones who arrive when it matters most, not the ones who share your last name. The ceremony itself was soft and small. No grand procession, just quiet promises, exchanged beneath a canopy of wildflowers. Ethan's father walked me down the aisle, his arm steady as he whispered, "You are loved, Hannah. Never doubt it." When Ethan and I stood hand in hand, I felt the gravity of our commitment. We weren't just joining lives, we were building something new from the ground up. For the first time, I saw myself not as someone left behind, but as someone chosen by Ethan, by the circle of support, and finally by myself. Of course, there were moments when loss welled up unexpectedly. During the reception, as toasts were made and laughter echoed, I caught myself scanning the crowd for my parents' faces. The sadness came in waves, but it was met each time by comfort, a squeeze from a friend, a knowing look from Ethan, the warmth of my new mother-in-law's embrace. In those gentle gestures, I found a new kind of belonging, one built on acceptance rather than obligation. After the wedding, Ethan and I drove out to the coast, our hands twined together on the center console. We talked about the family we wanted to build, a home filled with honesty, warmth, and the freedom to be our full selves. I told Ethan I don't ever want our kids to feel like they have to earn our love or that their happiness is a threat to anyone else's. He nodded, promising we'd make our own traditions, ones rooted in respect, not resentment. Looking back, I realized that losing my family's approval, as painful as it was, gave me a new measure of freedom. I was no longer performing for applause I might never receive. I could celebrate milestones on my own terms without shrinking myself or apologizing for my joy. I started reaching out to others who'd walked similar paths, women in my book club, neighbors who had complicated relationships with their own families. Their stories echoed mine: missed holidays, tense phone calls, the ache of being misunderstood. And yet they also spoke of resilience, of friendships that became lifelines, of the surprising ways happiness can bloom even in hard soil. There's a myth that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water, that loyalty means enduring any pain for the sake of unity. But sometimes the bravest act is letting go of those myths and choosing to love yourself first. I learned that love doesn't have to come wrapped in sacrifice or self-denial. It can be soft, steady, and mutual. It can heal what history has broken. The lesson that stayed with me from that season was simple, but hard one. You have the right to take up space in your own life. Your happiness matters even if others can't or won't celebrate it. You don't have to twist yourself into someone else's shape. just to keep the peace. The people who are meant to be in your life will want to see you whole and happy, not small and apologetic. My wedding day became more than a celebration of love. It was a declaration of self-worth, a promise to stop waiting for permission to be happy. And while there was grief in what was missing, there was also gratitude for all that I'd found: a partner who loved me unconditionally, friends who became family, and the slow, stubborn growth of confidence in my own skin. As the months passed and Ethan and I built our new life together, the old ache softened. The space my family left behind was filled bit by bit with new memories, new traditions, and the gentle understanding that healing isn't always loud or sudden. Sometimes it's just the quiet decision to keep moving forward, to let happiness in, and to trust that you are enough. But family stories are rarely finished. Just as I was learning to stand steady in my new world, an unexpected knock at our door would set everything spinning once again. The past wasn't done with me yet, and the next chapter would test every boundary I had worked so hard to build. The years after our wedding unfolded quietly at first, like the gentle pages of a new book. Ethan and I moved into a small craftsman house on a tree-lined street, painted the kitchen sunny yellow, and slowly filled the rooms with the sound of laughter and the soft thunder of little feet. Our daughter Grace arrived first, a bright, stubborn spirit with Ethan's eyes and my wild hair. 2 years later, her brother Jack joined us, all curiosity and mischief. Our home was never grand, but it pulsed with a warmth I'd only ever dreamed of as a child. Still, even as our family grew and thrived, there was an ache I carried quietly, a hollowed-out place where my parents and Natalie should have been. Distance has a way of reshaping grief, of softening sharp edges, but also of deepening certain regrets. I sometimes found myself reaching for the phone during holidays, my fingers hovering over my mother's number, my heart aching for a simple, ordinary conversation. There were times, birthday, school recitals, the day Jack learned to ride his bike, when I longed for my family to see the life I'd built, to share in our small joys and triumphs. I watched other mothers chatting easily with their parents at the playground and wondered if I'd ever know that kind of peace. Sometimes the pain felt fresh, as if the distance had only just begun. But time has its lessons too. With each year, I learned more about what it means to heal on your own terms. I found myself opening up to new connections, neighbors who became dear friends, parents at Grace's school, who reached out in small, meaningful ways. There was Susan, who dropped off soup when the kids had the flu, Mike, who taught Jack to fish, the older couple down the block who treated our children like grandchildren of their own. In their kindness, I discovered the truth of chosen family, that support and love can bloom in unexpected places if only you allow yourself to receive it. Sometimes I would talk with others who had experienced similar estrangement. At a neighborhood book club, a woman named Claire once shared, "I used to believe healing meant fixing the old relationships. Now I know it means building new ones and letting myself be happy anyway." Her words resonated with me deeply. I realized that it wasn't disloyal to let go of what hurt, it was necessary for growth. The more I released the old longing for approval, the more room I made for contentment. That didn't mean I never felt guilt. In fact, guilt can be the shadow that follows freedom. I worried that by embracing the life I had created, I was betraying the hope of reconciliation. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I would reread old emails from my mother, most of them brief and practical, always careful not to open any real conversation about what divided us. There was a tenderness there, but also a stubborn wall. We exchanged holiday cards and the occasional photograph, but neither side dared say what needed saying. It's a dance many families know well, staying close enough to remember, far enough not to reopen wounds. Raising children without my parents' involvement brought its own bittersweet lessons. There were moments I wished Grace and Jack could know. Their grandparents could have stories and recipes passed down, could feel the easy familiarity of a multi-generational household. But I was also grateful for the opportunity to give them something different, a home where boundaries were respected, where love wasn't conditional on silence, and where everyone's feelings mattered. I wanted them to know they could be honest, that their happiness was never a threat, that we would celebrate their victories without jealousy or resentment. As the years passed, I found comfort in small rituals. We created our own traditions: Sunday pancake breakfasts, messy art projects on rainy days, birthday cakes baked from scratch with little hands cracking eggs and spilling flour. We laughed, we fought, we forgave. Through it all, I held fast to the lesson that healing doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it's the simple act of building a life that feels true and whole. And yet the question of forgiveness lingered. I wondered, Was it possible to truly let go of old pain without ever hearing I'm sorry? Could I forgive my parents and Natalie from afar, not as a gift to them, but as a kindness to myself? One evening after Grace asked why she didn't have two grandmas like her friend, I found myself telling her gently that families come in all shapes and that sometimes people need space to grow and heal. I realized as I spoke that forgiveness is a process, not a single moment. It's the slow softening of anger, the acceptance of what can't be changed, the courage to love anyway. The biggest lesson I learned during those years was that distance, though painful, can be a powerful tool for clarity and growth. Sometimes, stepping away from old patterns is the only way to see them clearly. I began to understand my parents' choices in a new light, not as deliberate cruelty, but as the product of their own fears and wounds. That didn't erase the hurt, but it did allow me to find peace with what was, rather than endlessly wishing for what could have been. Life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. Just as I settled into this hard-won peace, believing I'd finally left the old drama behind, the past came knocking, literally. One Saturday afternoon, while the kids were painting at the kitchen table, a familiar car pulled into our driveway. My heart raced. Through the window, I saw my parents and Natalie stepping out, uncertainty written across their faces. In that moment, all the years of distance, regret, and growth converged. I realized that the next chapter wouldn't be about running from the past, but about facing it on my own terms, with the boundaries and wisdom I'd spent so long building. Seeing my parents and Natalie on my doorstep after so many years felt almost dreamlike, unreal, like a scene from someone else's memory. The children peeked curiously from the hallway as I opened the door, my heart a wild mixture of dread, hope, and something like resolve. My mother smiled hesitantly, clutching a casserole dish the way she always did in times of uncertainty. My father's eyes darted around, never quite meeting mine, while Natalie lingered behind her face, a mixture of longing and pride. "We'd like to come in if that's all right," my mother said, her voice softer than I remembered. I hesitated just a moment before stepping aside, knowing I had prepared myself for this moment, though never quite believing it would come. The conversation that followed was awkward at first, like relearning an old dance with new steps. We sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by children's artwork and the scent of coffee, trying to bridge a canyon of lost years with small talk about weather and work. But beneath the surface, I could sense a storm brewing, unfinished business that had traveled all this way with them. Eventually, Natalie spoke, her words tumbling out in a rush. She was struggling, lost her job, felt left behind, as life moved forward without her. My parents, anxious and tired, revealed how worried they were for her future. Then, in a moment that would have once devastated me, my mother finally said it. "We were hoping you might help. Natalie could use a place to land, someone to lean on, maybe even a second chance at happiness now that you have so much." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The old pattern rose up, guilt, responsibility, the urge to say yes. But the years had changed me. I thought of my children in the next room, of Ethan's quiet trust of the home we had built, brick by brick. I realized this was the test all those lessons and boundaries had prepared me for. Gently, I replied, "I care about all of you, but I can't sacrifice my family's peace or my own happiness anymore. Natalie, you're strong and I know you'll find your way, but I can't be the one to fix things for you. We have to find new ways forward, all of us." My voice trembled, but I didn't waver. This wasn't the answer my parents had hoped for. My mother's eyes filled with tears and Natalie looked away. For a long moment, it seemed as though the past might swallow us whole. But then something remarkable happened. My father let out a long sigh and for the first time admitted, "Maybe we asked too much of you, Hannah. Maybe it's time we learned to stand on our own." The relief and pain mingled in my chest, knowing we were finally, if awkwardly, telling the truth. I've since learned that many families face these crossroads when old roles no longer serve, and the only path forward is through honest, sometimes painful conversation. My friend Carla once told me how she had to draw a firm line with her brother, who had always relied on her to bail him out. "It was the hardest thing I ever did," she said, "but it was also the start of something healthier for both of us. Standing your ground, even with love, is not an act of cruelty, but an act of hope. Hope that everyone can grow, even if it's uncomfortable at first." The lesson that stayed with me was this: boundaries are not walls. They are doors that can open to a new kind of relationship, one based on mutual respect, rather than old habits of sacrifice and expectation. When we stop rescuing, we give others the dignity to rescue themselves. In that moment, I realized I could love my family without losing myself. As the visit drew to a close, we hugged tentatively, but with the possibility of forgiveness and new beginnings hovering in the air. My children waved goodbye, not fully understanding the history that had just shifted around them, but sensing the quiet hope that lingered. I closed the door gently, feeling both lighter and heavier, grateful for how far I had come. But life, I knew, would continue to offer its lessons. In learning to hold my boundaries, I had discovered a new kind of love, one that would shape the final chapter of this story, the power of letting go, and the grace of building something beautiful from the broken pieces. In the days and weeks after my family's visit, life gradually returned to its familiar rhythms: morning coffee, with Ethan children's laughter echoing through the house, the gentle routines that make up an ordinary, extraordinary life. But something had shifted inside me. For the first time, I felt the quiet certainty of a boundary well kept. The ache of old wounds had softened, replaced by a peaceful acceptance of what I could and could not control. My family's struggle was real, but so was my right to choose a different path for myself and for those I loved most. Letting go wasn't a single act, it was an ongoing promise, a decision renewed every time I honored my own needs without guilt. I thought often of the families I'd met along the way. Friends, neighbors, strangers who'd shared their stories of tangled loyalties and bittersweet choices. There was Susan, who finally invited her estranged brother to Thanksgiving, not because she'd forgotten the past, but because she was ready to begin a new chapter. There was my coworker Rob, who drew a line with his parents about visits gently but firmly, so he could be more present with his own children. Each story echoed a truth. I was just beginning to claim for myself that love is strongest when it is chosen freely, not demanded or sacrificed for. True connection requires honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. And healing, I learned, is possible sometimes in unexpected, imperfect ways. Looking back, I realized that my journey wasn't just about learning to say no. It was about learning to say yes to my own happiness, to healthy relationships, to the messy, beautiful work of building a life on my own terms. Our little family flourished in ways I never could have imagined. Grace and Jack grew up knowing they were safe to speak their minds and make mistakes, that home was a place where everyone belonged just as they were. Ethan and I celebrated not only the big milestones, but the small victories: quiet mornings, bedtime stories, laughter after long days. We chose each other every day as partners and friends. My legacy, I decided, wouldn't be the roles I played to keep the peace, but the love and resilience I passed on to my children. If there's a lesson I hope my story leaves with you, it's this: your value isn't measured by how much you give up or how quietly you endure. You are worthy of love that celebrates your presence, not just your sacrifice. Families, like all relationships, change and grow. They can break, but they can also heal, especially when we dare to set new patterns and invite others to meet us in the truth. The legacy you build doesn't have to repeat what came before. Every act of courage, every honest conversation, every gentle boundary is a gift not just to yourself, but to everyone who comes after. Now, as I watch Grace and Jack move bravely through the world, sometimes stumbling, always learning, I remind myself that my job is not to rescue them from every hardship, but to walk beside them as they discover their own strength. I tell them stories about my family, about forgiveness and hope, and the beauty of starting over. I encourage them to hold their boundaries, to listen to their hearts, to believe that love and respect can go hand in hand. And in those quiet moments, I feel the circle finally closing, a story, rewritten, a new beginning, a legacy of courage and connection, blooming right here at home. And if you find yourself standing at your own crossroads, torn between old patterns and the life you wish for, know this: it is never too late to choose yourself. It is never too late to begin again. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply refuse to give up on your own happiness. And when you do, you open the door for others to do the same. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If any part of my story resonated with you, I hope you'll share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to let go in order to grow? What legacy do you hope to build for yourself or for the people you love? Your voice matters here. And remember, you are never alone in choosing a new path. If this story touched something in your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts or experiences in the comments. Have you ever had to choose your own happiness over someone else's expectations? What have you learned about setting boundaries, letting go, or building a new kind of family? If you found value here, please consider subscribing, liking, or sharing this video with someone who might need encouragement today. Your support helps this community grow and reminds all of us that we're not alone in the challenges we face. And if you'd like to hear more stories about resilience, healing, and the power of choosing yourself, make sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss the next chapter. Remember, you deserve a story that celebrates your worth. Keep going, your happiness is worth fighting for, and you never know whose life you might inspire by sharing your own. Thank you for being here and for choosing this moment for yourself.